I'm retired from St Andrews, from the art history department, and since retiring, I've devoted myself a bit to a bit of research into the subscribers to Thomas Chippendale's pattern book, which is here. And the lecture that you'll hear, you won't see a great deal of furniture. It's mainly about people, the people who subscribed to Thomas Chippendale. And yes, the connections and the connection with North East Fife in particular is quite interesting. So I've spent some very happy days in country house libraries in the East Neuk, looking at copies of the pattern book, and I'm going to go through a few of the patrons, not all of them, but a few. Actually, can you all hear me just like this, rather than? Yes. If you can't, I'll start using the microphone. A bit more comfortable doing that. Right. This is the book. The first. Could you speak up? Yes, I can, Bill. Yes, I can. Yes, I project myself to you. Yes. This is the book here. The first comprehensive book of furniture designs to be published in English, and this is the first the title page. As you can see, the Gentleman and Cabinet Maker's Director, being a large collection of elegant and useful designs of household furniture in the Gothic, Chinese and modern taste. Everything from chairs to chimney furniture. Bill, I will use the microphone. Can you hear now, Bill? Good, yes, okay, good. Right, everything from chairs to chimney furniture. And by modern taste, Chippendale meant the Rococo, R-O-C-O-C-O, which is a kind of rather whimsical design style made up of sinuous curves there. And this type of chair, a pierced splat back chair in the Rococo style, is the style which Chippendale became most famous for. Now, the book was published in 1753 and went into 3 editions, 1754, 1755, and an edition in the 1760s, 1762 as well. It was translated into French, and it even found its way to America, where it had a great influence in the 18th century. But it was advertised, first of all, not in London, but in Edinburgh, in the Caledonian Mercury. And the advertisement, which you see here, it's too small to read because we've just put this slide into the talk, haven't we, Hannah? Yes. It didn't appear, so we've had to do a bit of last-minute finding of it. But underneath the advert for a little brown Sheltie mare, there's an advert for the Gentleman and Cabinet Maker's Director. And just here, it says the price to subscribers will be £1 10 shillings in sheets, or £1 14 shillings bound, one half to be paid down on subscribing, and the other half on delivery of the book, which will be published in July next. The price then will be raised to 2 guineas. So subscribing to the book meant you get it at a discounted price. Now, further on in the advertisement, it tells you that subscriptions are taken in by the authors Alexander Spence and Thomas Chippendale. Now, you may think it's unusual there to have Alexander Spence's name before Thomas Chippendale, and I want you to remember that name as we proceed in this talk, because he's an important person. So, out of the 300 and odd subscribers, over a quarter were Scots, and it's probably due in some part to the advertisement appearing first in Edinburgh. But this is a little map of the distribution of subscribers, and most of them, as you can see, are in Edinburgh, 50. Glasgow comes a poor second, really, 8 subscribers there, 1 in Aberdeen, several throughout the sort of central belt of Scotland, and 15 in North East Fife, which is where we are now. And I want to try and explain why North East Fife was of importance. Now, to begin with the aristocratic patrons, the Duke of Hamilton was perhaps the most senior in the hierarchy. Not really a man interested in furniture, more of a sportsman himself, a game shooter, but a man who I think felt it his duty to subscribe to such a book and possibly use it to furnish his enormous house, Hamilton Palace, that was demolished in the 1920s due to mining subsidence. Next, an aristocrat whose family made their money from lead, not from coal, John Chippendale of Hopetoun, also a subscriber to the director. But Hopetoun House, which does stand and is still lived in by the family, doesn't contain Chippendale furniture, but it does contain a lot of furniture which was inspired by the designs in the book. The Earl of Hopetoun bought his furniture in Edinburgh from furniture-making concerns such as the Edinburgh Upholstery Company of Carrubbers Close and Alexander Peter of Horsewind, who made furniture using Chippendale's designs for Hopetoun House, and you can see these today inside. So, to Fife and the 15 subscribers here, which are mainly clustered in North East Fife, but there's one outlier here in Aberdour, and that was the Earl of Morton. The Earl of Morton, a known connoisseur. I'd like to think that that book that he's resting his arm on there is Chippendale's director, but it's too early, I'm afraid, this portrait, 1740. With his family there, in an idealized setting, but you can see that he was a man who liked his fashionable furniture, and interestingly, his children are archers. The dog's rather rococo, by the way, I think, that little, you see, if such thing as a rococo dog exists, that's one. The Earl of Morton, his family seat was at Aberdour, but he was building a new house on the other side of the Forth. And this is it, Dalmahoy, which is now a golf club. And the house still stands. There's no furniture, to my knowledge, in it by Chippendale, but it's good to visit as the scene of the house of a Chippendale patron, and a house that did once contain Chippendale furniture, because the Earl of Morton ordered a bed, and this is it here. Now this bed is one of 2. This is the original drawing for it. One of 2 that Chippendale made. The other was for the Earl of Dumfries, which exists at Dumfries House in Ayrshire. The Earl of Morton ordered the second one, and I taught a daughter of the present Earl of Morton at St Andrews, Henrietta, and I said to her, Henrietta, have you got a rococo bed at all in your house? And unfortunately she said no, and didn't find anything in the attic, I'm afraid. So, but this design is for the Earl of Morton's bed. And as you can see, it's a confection of sinuous arabesque curves, cabochon, and so on, which really is encapsulates the Rococo style. What Chippendale did, and his consummate skill, was in drawing. This is an original drawing by Chippendale, and he then passed it on to an engraver who would engrave it, and then it would be published in the book. So, but to look at the original drawing is a completely different experience, and unfortunately it's very difficult to do because the original drawings for the director are in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it's very, very difficult to get access to them. The American curators make it very difficult for us to see these things, but I was lucky enough to inspect this drawing, and it's full of life, absolutely full of energy, much more energy than the engraved version. So we know that the Earl of Morton did buy a bed that was once in Dalmahoy House. Whereabouts in the golf club it was, I don't know. It'd be nice to visit and discover which bedroom it was in. Now, moving down the scale of gentry, I want now to look at North East Fife patrons. This is an entirely different character, Sir John Anstruther of Anstruther, who didn't live at Balcaskey, where the Anstruthers live today, but lived at Ely House, which is now flats. Now, he was in a way, although not a titled aristocrat, a typical patron of Thomas Chippendale, a very enterprising man who lived in a house smaller than Dalmahoy or Hopetoun or Hamilton Palace, but nevertheless a house with a fine library and a house that was centred on the industrial exploitation of his own estate. And when I say industrial exploitation, I mean the use of minerals and materials that he could find on that estate. But he was the lucky first mentioned in the names of subscribers, as you can see here, Sir John Anstruther, number one, simply because his name begins with A. But looking down the list of subscribers there, you can see that the prominent impression is of a Scottish subscriber. The names, by no means all of which I've researched, are Scottish. Affleck, Allen, Allanson, Anderson, you see, are not. They're predominantly Scottish names. And this might surprise many people who think that Chippendale is a very English phenomenon, because his importance in Scotland is much more profound than people realise. Sir John Anstruther was married to a very strong-willed woman, Janet Fall, known as the Queen of the Gypsies in Fife in the 1750s. Apparently had a very swarthy complexion, but she, as much as him, was played a part in patronising Chippendale and deciding what to have in their house at Ely. They were both painted by Reynolds. She was late for her appointment to be painted, which is a sort of indication, I think, of her personality. The raw materials that Anstruther exploited on the estates in the East Neuk included coal, but also salt. He made salt by evaporating seawater, and the pans can still be seen today at St Monant's, and the windmill which pumped up the water into the pans is similarly still in existence. But he also had, as well as a library full of books, both artistic but also scientific, industrial interests in Pit and Weem. In Pit and Weem, he kept his whaling ships, and Pit and Weem was also the centre of a carpet manufactory, believe it or not. He imported, along with Harry Erskine, another Fife landowner, a Frenchman called Germain Havard from Normandy to make carpets in Pit and Weem. I've never discovered where the carpet manufactory was, but this was a luxury product being made in the coastal borough of Pit and Weem, and an indication, in a way, both of the tastes of the local landowners, but also of the capabilities of manufacturing in this part of Fife at the time. Now, moving further on down the list of subscribers, one encounters rather peculiar names like James Lummisden of Runny Hill. It's not unless you live in Anstruther that you realise that's Rennie Hill, which is today a farmhouse in Kilrenny. But it rather strikes me that the subscription process seems to have been done over the telephone with a clerk in London receiving the orders and saying, "What was that? What did you call it? Oh yes, Mr. Runny Hill, I'll write that down, right?" Because they're all rather sort of garbled, but one can translate them. So here we see under L, the Marquis of Lothian, Thomas Lundin of Lundin Tower, Lundin Links, James Lumsden of Rennie Hill, and Mr. David Lothian. So it's also confusing because having seen this, I thought, right, okay, the farmhouse at Rennie Hill is where the patron lived, but it's not so. That was the original seat, the ancient seat of the Lumsden family. But at this time, 1753, when the director was advertised, James Lumsden wasn't living in Kilrenny, but in St Andrews, and he lived at the achingly beautiful house, I think, of Strattyram, just outside St Andrews, and where he was married to Miss Sharp. And he was a very prominent subscriber. This is the original facade of Strattyram. The house has been turned round. John Thompson of Charlton, another interesting patron. The house Charlton, further down the East Neuk from Ely, just near Collinsborough, in fact, still lived in by the same family, descendants of the Thompsons. And I did urge Mickey Bunda, the present incumbent, to have his family portraits cleaned because they're filthy. But this is the portrait of John Thompson of Charlton, the man who subscribed to Chippendale's director in 1753, who answered that advertisement, and that is his, again, strong-willed wife, Margaret Patterson. And this is the house. And this, of course, is a golf course as well. Charlton, in front of Charlton House, you know, see I think an 18-hole golf course, isn't it? Yes. A fascinating house. No Chippendale furniture in it, I'm afraid. I've searched it high and low. But there is the legacy of Chippendale, because they've got a wonderful collection of chairs by William Wheeler of Arncroke, who some of you will know. Now, William Wheeler, very interesting family of wheelwrights in the village of Arncroke, near Kelly Castle, lasted right through until the 1960s, and they were making chairs in the Chippendale style. These ones, children's chairs, or known as gossip chairs, very much favoured by the farming community to give as gifts on occasions, christening and that kind of thing. So it's very much a kind of a classic piece of Fife furniture. But I see it as part of the legacy of Chippendale in Fife, because Chippendale had such a strong influence in this county that it remains in the designs of furniture makers right through into the middle of the 20th century. So, just to return to that map of the distribution of subscribers in Fife, and to go inland to the county town, where I spent nigh on 30 years living, and I still have a very great fondness for Cooper. The subscriber that we have to look at here, again it's this telephone distortion, is Archibald Hope of Rankeillor, Esquire. There's the Earl of Hopetoun, a kinsman of Archibald Hope of Rankeillor. There's the Duke of Hamilton. There's Robert Hamilton of Kilbrookmont. You're a Hamilton, aren't you, David? Yes. Do you think you're related to this man? No. Very interesting. I just won't spend much time on him, but he had a townhouse in Anstruther, right on the right-angled bend, as you go through from into Anstruther Wester High Street, and it's called the Great Lodging. But he was a great spendthrift, spent all his money, had to sell the trees on his estate at Kilbrackmont, it's called, and the estate was eventually bought by the Crawfords of Balcarres. They didn't want somebody else overlooking their estate, so they absorbed it into Balcarres. But a man certainly worth further research, I think, Robert Hamilton of Kilbrackmont. But we're looking at Archibald Hope of Rankeillor. This is Rankeillor House, outside Cooper, by James McLaren. Unfortunately, I don't think lived in very much today, an absentee owner, but it's the only house for which Chippendale accounts survive. And in the family papers, there were purchases made from Chippendale's firm to furnish this house outside Cooper. Lord Elphinstone, seen here in a portrait, a Fife landowner, but with a townhouse in Cooper. In fact, he was known as Lord Cooper, one of his titles, an extinct title, I think, today, but and his lands were around Balmerino to the north of Fife, but he was a subscriber, as was David Scott of Scott's Tarvit, a very dynamic man. His house, rather severe tower, and it's the least sort of likely place you would imagine to find Chippendale furniture, I think, but he owned land in the East Neuk of Fife, and Balcomie was one of his houses, which was latterly owned by General Scott, the richest commoner in Britain. But it remains to be seen whether this Scott actually bought Chippendale furniture. He probably did. He also lived at Barnes, the Barnes estate just south of Crail. John Craigie of Dunbarney. Now this is an interesting one. Craigie of Dunbarney was a man who brought the name Dunbarney with him from Perthshire when he got a job at St Andrews University. He became a professor at St Andrews and thought he'd better move from Perthshire into Fife, and he bought this house. What is at the heart of this house, an old Scots house beneath this early 19th century accretion, is the old house of How Hill, which he had an Act of Parliament passed to bring the name Dumbarnie from his old family house to this place. And it was called Dumbarnie for many years, centuries in fact, after that. And of course it's a golf course today. The farmlands around Dumbarnie is, I think, a very expensive golf course, isn't it? And a new one at that. It's now called La Hill House, and it's passed through different owners. It's owned by Lord Lindsay today, and there's no Chippendale furniture in it, disappointingly. But the academic connection is interesting because, as well as Craigie, there were two professors of philosophy, the very last subscribers, the Young brothers, who bought Chippendale's director. And the reason why, I don't know, apart from the fact that, of course, university lecturers are exquisitely cultured people who are interested in the finer things of life. The Young brothers. This is John Young. There was a series of portraits of university dons done in the 18th century, but the artist obviously couldn't draw faces, so he did it all from behind. But presumably, John Young is recognizable from the cast of his shoulders and the way he walks. This is his house, which is now the remain reception area for St Leonard's School. When St Leonard's College, a university college, was dissolved in, I think, 1748, the college itself was divided into plots, and these plots were bought by professors who built houses on them. So if you go into the present quadrangle of St Leonard's School, you'll see various houses that were developed by university professors and possibly furnished with Chippendale furniture. I've been through aristocrats, minor gentry, academics, and I want to look at two examples of craftspeople, because the book was useful to craftspeople as well as owners of country houses. And the most interesting first one is Thomas Clayton, plasterer of Hamilton. Now, he had a connection with the Duke of Hamilton because he plastered various buildings for this man, and one of them was Châtellerault, or Châtellerault as people call it, I think, in the west, on the estate of Hamilton Palace. You can just about see it, I think, from the M74, can't you, as you drive north. The grandest dog kennels in Scotland, I think, certainly with the grandest ceilings. But Thomas Clayton clearly made use of Chippendale's Rococo patterns for the decorative plasterwork that he did for patrons like the Duke. From plasterwork to jewellery, Mr. William Dempster, a prominent patron, subscriber rather, and this is his shop. Can you see there? This is St Giles Cathedral. In the 18th century, St Giles Cathedral was surrounded by a multiplicity of little shops, rather like barnacles clinging to the hull of a ship. And these shops dealt in fancy goods, jewellery in this case. So this is Dempster's shop, and at the time when he subscribed to Chippendale's director. And this is something that he made, a tea kettle in the characteristic Scottish style. And this is a coffee pot, I think, clearly inspired by Chippendale, but he got a bit carried away, I think, by use of the designs there. This is in the Huntley House Museum in the old town of Edinburgh. But I think you can see by looking at that, and then by looking at the designs in the director, that they were aimed at woodworkers, but equally adaptable to other media, such as metalwork or plasterwork. Well, that's enough craftsmen, I think. Let's look at some other subscribers. George Dempster of Dunnican. Now, there's not a Fifer, an Angus man, but a very stylish gent. This is him portrayed by the Scottish artist George Willison. Very fine dress. He was a graduate of St Andrews University, like several of the ones I've talked about already. That's certainly a common connection that they had. And he liked St Andrews so much that he became provost of the city in the 18th century. He was also an archer, a skilled archer, and this is his archery medal from 1750. George Dempster, Esquire of Dunnican, 1750. And there's a strong connection between archery and golf. I think the original building, so Kieran tells me, was originally shared by the archers and the golfers when it was the first meeting place of the St Andrews Society of Golfers. So many of the people I'm talking about were members of both the Golfing Society and the Company of Archers. Now, talking of people from outside Fife, Francis and Catherine Charteris, again, there's the telephone muddle has muddled up the name, Charteris of Amesfield, which is near Haddington. Now, obviously they were an East Lothian family. Two very interesting things about them. First of all, they, husband and wife, both subscribed in their own names, unusual. And the reason why is because Catherine Charteris was the daughter of a duke, so she thought of herself of equal importance or greater importance than her husband, so she had her name put in the subscribers list. They were from Haddington, but he bought the estate of Cambo in the East Neuk, ostensibly to stay in when his son was at St Andrews University, but I think the main reason was so he could be near the golf course and play golf. This is Charteris, and you can see, I think by the body language here, that he deferred to his wife, Lady Catherine, daughter of the Duke of Gordon. He was a Jacobite, I think, which is evident from his dress, a Freemason, an archer, all sorts of things which possibly connect him with other subscribers to Chippendale's book. This is the house that he built, Amesfield, now demolished, outside Haddington. And again, I think, a golf club, isn't it? Is it a golf course outside Haddington, Amesfield? I think it is. Yes, it is, a golf club. You're nodding, yes. Have you played it? No. Yes, you played it. Good. I'm glad. This is another picture of it. And this is some of the furniture from Amesfield, now at Gosford House, which is another house owned by the family, Amesfield having been demolished. And all this furniture in this room is Scottish. Many people, when you're researching the subject of furniture, and you go to a country house, they say, well, it's all made in London. And what I do, I go to the family papers and I look at them and I say, well, I'm afraid I don't think it was. It was made in Edinburgh, where Edinburgh was a centre of extremely fine furniture. And so all this stuff here was made in Edinburgh, but this was also made in Edinburgh, but using a Chippendale design. So a Chinese bed, a day bed, which Lord Weems, the present owner of a pair of these, originally made for Amesfield, tells me were possibly opium smoking beds, which kind of, I don't know, it kind of rings true when we look at the character of Francis Charteris. But the family ledgers reveal that as well as paying John Baxter, the architect, for building on the estate, and John Adam, the architect, for building as well, he paid Alexander Peter Wright, which means furniture maker, for making furniture. And indeed, Alexander Peter of Carrubbers Close in Edinburgh was the man who made that. So it's a pitfall that furniture historians can fall into, that when you see a piece of furniture that corresponds with a design in Chippendale's director, do not assume that it was made by Chippendale. If it's in Scotland, it was possibly made by an Edinburgh maker. And this applies to places like Dumfries House too. So, the Masonic predilections of Francis Charteris are expressed in his tomb here in the form of an Egyptian pyramid. But he had many, many interests, and as well as the ones I've already mentioned, he was a very convivial man and interested in sensual pleasure. And as a result of that, because of his Fife ownership of Cambo Estate, he was what can only be described, I think, as a prominent member of the Beggars' Benison Society, which was a sex club for ministers, landowners, customs officers who were titillated and used this various paraphernalia, which is now in the closed collection of St Andrews University, to entertain themselves of an evening in the East Neuk of Fife. Now, amongst the prominent members of this exclusive society was Alexander Spens, which we return to, having seen his name in the advertisement for Chippendale's director. And we find in the Scots magazine in 1755 that he died on that island in Jamaica. Death, December 1755 in Jamaica, Mr. Alexander Spens, son of Mr. Thomas Spens of Lathallen, Fife. It turns out that Alexander Spens was an architect. And the reason why he was cited in the advertisement for Thomas Chippendale's director in 1753 was that he made, and there's the advertisement that you saw earlier on, Alexander Spens there, that he did the architectural frontispiece, the preface to the book, explaining the orders of architecture, which you had to understand before you could understand the design of furniture. That was why he was an author. And because it's the beginning of the book, maybe he was cited as before Thomas Chippendale himself. The only building that we can firmly attribute to Alexander Spens in his short life before going to Jamaica is Inageli House, which I think was recently for sale. And I don't know whether it's been bought yet, but if you look at the design, peculiar design of the Ionic capitals on the corner pilasters, they correspond exactly with these in Alexander Spens's preface to Chippendale's director. And what is more, Inageli House was the meeting place of the Beggars' Benison sex club in the 1750s. So it all comes together. And the Lumsdens, who owned this house at that time, also subscribers to Thomas Chippendale's Director, bought Lathallen from the architect of this house. This is Lathallen, now demolished, where Alexander Spenz's family came from. And the Lumsdens bought this house and owned it when this engraving was made in 1808. So, the question we must ask ourselves is, I've put before you the various connections that these subscribers have. St Andrews University is one connection. Freemasonry might be a connection. Jacobitism might be a connection. Membership of the Sex Club, the Beggars' Benison, might be a connection. But the one thing that brings them all together is golf. They were all members of the St Andrews Society of Golfers, which then became the Royal and Ancient Golf Club. And interestingly, it was founded in 1754, the exact time that the Chippendale Director was published. So it was all happening in that year. And if we look in further detail at the names of the founder members, here they all are. Francis Charteris, the Weemses, which I haven't talked about, but were Fife subscribers. David Scott of Scott's Tarvit, David Young, Professor of Philosophy, James Lumsden, Esquire, Provost of St Andrews, and so on, Thomas Spence of Lathallen, and so on and so on. They were all members of the Golfing Society. And what did they discuss on the golf course? Well, of course, Thomas Chippendale. And although we don't really know what they were discussing here on the golf course, what we do know is that it was these gentlemen who financed Thomas Chippendale's book. So Thomas Chippendale was not a Scot. He was an Englishman, a Yorkshireman, born in Otley in Yorkshire, just outside Leeds. He was the son of a poor furniture maker, also called William Chippendale, who made coffins and cupboards and things like that. But he was a man of precocious talent. And somewhere, somehow, this group of Fife gents noticed him, probably in London, and recognized his talent, and sent one of their number, who happened to be an Aberdonian, but a man of great business interest in Fife, to London to look after their investment. They leased 3 houses in St Martin's Lane, the central one being set up as the workshop of Thomas Chippendale, the one to the south, Thomas Chippendale's house, and the one to the north, the house of the Scotsman James Ranney, who was sent down to look after their investment. Thomas Chippendale was parachuted into the centre of fashion in London. The Book of Patterns was financed from Scotland. It became the most famous pattern book that we know as far as furniture is concerned, and the rest is history. Thank you very much.